Final speaker in this slot is Deputy Joe Costello. Deputy, you now have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nascan Corla. I'm delighted to have the opportunity of speaking on this motion. I want to thank my colleagues for sharing their time with me and Deputy Brendan Howland for tabling the motion. It's certainly a long time, Nascan Corla, since the Dáil has had a wide-ranging debate on the present coalition government, combined with the institutions that underpin that government and indeed in relation to the houses of the Oireachtas itself. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we have what you might call the perfect storm. That is, we have bad government and we have outdated and ineffective institutions. Bad government can only be remedied by the people in a general election, and we must make every effort to ensure that that general election takes place as soon as possible and that the bad government is removed. That must be our first reform priority. This bad government has presided over the greatest financial crisis, the greatest recession and the highest unemployment in the history of the state. So bad is this government that it even attempted to thwart the constitutional right to full Dáil representation by the electors of Donegal South West, Donegal North East, Dublin South and Waterford. It has failed to stop the by-election taking place in Donegal, despite its efforts in the courts, but it is now applying to the Supreme Court to prevent the other outstanding by-elections taking place. Instead of deploying all its energies into preventing the IMF taking over the country and preventing our loss of financial sovereignty, its sole concern, this government's sole concern, is to stay in power by hook or by crook. In the process, the government is denying tens of thousands of the citizens of this country their democratic right to parliamentary representation. These underhand actions are unacceptable in a democracy and bordering on dictatorship. That, Minister, is the first area where we need to introduce reform and indeed legislation to effect it. Secondly, the Labour Party private member's motion includes a substantial and detailed package of reforms which would greatly improve the workings of the institutions if implemented. The government's amendment to the motion indicates that a reform package to improve the workings of the Dáil is now being tabled by the government. We have not seen the government's proposed package of proposals, but at least our motion has succeeded in flushing out the government and making them respond. The government's proposals, however, are exclusively about the Dáil. They do not extend to the Seanad or to the government or to the departments. It will be of little value to reform the Dáil and leave the government as unaccountable as ever. What is needed is a comprehensive package of reform that will overhaul every area of governance so that the citizens of the country can have confidence in the institutions of the state and in our democracy once more. The issues that are outlined here are quite comprehensive, Minister. Freedom of information, that has been spancelled by this government through costs and so on. The remit, why won't this government allow legislation to encompass freedom of information, every new piece of legislation, rather than subsequently down the road maybe allowing it years later or maybe not allowing it. Whistleblowers legislation is necessary. Appointment to state boards needs to be overhauled. Spending limits in elections and donations, regulation of lobbyists, the break-up of government monopoly on legislation, very important that the Oireachtas has power to introduce legislation as well as the government. The Minister's responsibility to the Dáil, rather than hiding behind quangos as happens at the present time. Consequently, we can't get a decent PQ answered, or we can't get a decent answer to any of the PQs that are tabled here. Increase in the Dáil working days, proposed 50%. We open up the budget, is very necessary, the budgetary process to proper scrutiny. We're going to have to do it anyway with the European Union shortly if we're not very careful. The Dáil Committee.
You now have 1 minute.
The Dáil committees to have far greater powers so that we can conduct a lot of the business and deal with a lot of the issues that arise ourselves. Reform is essentially about transparency, accountability and effectiveness of government action and state institutions. Finally, could I say that there is an elephant in the House here, and that is the European Union. The government has failed entirely to provide adequate institutional reform to enable Ireland to play a significant role in the development of the European Union in recent times, or in maximising the opportunities available through successive treaty changes over the last 13 years of this government in one form or another. The Taoiseach, for example, committed us to treaty change going to a council meeting without reference to the Dáil, and he came back a week later and told us that's not acceptable. That's government showing disrespect. There's an overload of legislative proposals, and we haven't addressed that in institutional fashion. We have an entitlement, but no input. We're making no input into the Commissioner's annual draft plans, despite the fact that the Secretary-General, Catherine Day, has again and again told us this is the area for Ireland to exercise and exert the greatest influence. We have not established any alliance in recent times with smaller countries. We did in the past. And now we have a massive power access between France and Germany building up, which has been created, and we have not done anything about that. Ireland is now isolated like Greece. That is extremely dangerous in these particular terms, these particular times when we owe so much money to the ECB and when the IMF wolf is at the door. Could I say in conclusion, Laskin Corla, that we urgently need to review the way we conduct our business in this House, and we need to make our practice and our procedures and our institutions far more relevant to the needs of our country and our citizens.